in 2023, I heard Walker speak. Walker works under you guys, and he shared some of what God was doing in T Nation and some of what the message of Fred Marker having to do with the cycles of nations and just where we are globally.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard it and I was like, this is what I've been waiting for.
Mm.
And Chad and I had just come out of a longer fast preparing for a shift of see, we could tell there was a shift of
Wow.
seasons. And I told Chad, you have to hear this message. You have to hear
Mhm.
it. And I got him into the same room with Walker, and he heard probably all of 60 seconds of what Walker was saying, and he could feel it. And he's, yes. And that's how we ended up at the Nazarite
Mhm.
Intensive
Wow.
Yeah.
because we could just feel like this is what we have been waiting for.
Yeah.
And this is making everything that we're experiencing with dreams,
Mhm.
with discontent, where sometimes it's hard to articulate. It's not FOMO, right? It's just this drive in
Yeah.
you from the Lord. And sometimes
Yeah.
it's hard to differentiate. You're like, no, I'm not dissatisfied with the portion you've given me, Lord, but I also know that there's more.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and so really encountering that message and just this intensity for me, following you guys and staying tuned into what you're doing, I feel like this is the biggest, like to me, what you
Mhm.
guys are doing is the most important thing on the planet right now, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, serving your shut-in neighbor is also the most important thing on the planet right
Yeah.
now. But I have just loved being privy to what you guys are doing, and I'd love to hear more about
Mhm.
um, that. And then maybe you can share even more in our third meeting.
So, can do what you.
Yeah. So I would say thank you. I mean, first of all, thank you. We're
Yeah,
glad that we connected with you guys as well.
Yeah.
And if I were to situate kind of where we are in our present conversation to today,
yeah, yeah,
um, part of what the call was, and part of who Lou is, was this contending for the destinies of nations. And I think for Lou, that started with the prayer, how can I turn America back to God? And for
yeah,
those of you guys who don't know, Lou started the call 27, 28 national gatherings in stadiums and arenas. And it was a mass mobilization in the spirit of Joel 2, 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people are called by name, pray. Right. And so um, the recipe or the prescription for a nation in crisis is the solemn assembly and is prayer, really, is corporate intercession. And so that was our DNA. That's who we are. That's what we grew up in. We spent our 20s serving this vision, not just because it was a father's vision, but it was also our life vision. And so that I think that put us in a posture where we no longer viewed world events or even national events as circumstantial or coincidental or
mm,
spontaneous. We we
mhm,
we saw um, that the Lord had a purpose for a nation and that the enemy would constantly try to thwart that purpose, right? And so
right,
there's a worldview that we see in Scripture, and I think it's a biblical worldview that God gives a promise, and the enemy will unleash everything that he has to try to destroy that promise. And it is the job of the church in intercession to partner with God in the birthing of that promise, right? And so that's we see that through, and that is the cycle of Israel's history. That's the church history, right? And we're headed towards the end game, the gospel to all nations, right? And the return of the Lord. But
yeah,
um, you know, for Lou, that was so much heavily America, right? And so we went city to city, region to region. We did arenas and stadiums with Lou all across the nation, prayer strikes, college campuses. We went to 300 campuses. I think just Audrey and I, just us, went to 300 campuses. And I think 25% of that was with our team, right? And so like we're just like we just went. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
Because of a word of that, one of the words that we stuck with us is from Vanette Bright. She was the wife of Bill Bright. She
yeah,
started the National Day of Prayer, prolific leader of intercession. She said, "The one who mobilizes the college campuses of America to pray will inaugurate the greatest awakening in the history of our nation." Right, and so that's always kind of been part of our MO, right?
yeah,
But our posture has always been, what is the Lord doing, and how do we partner with that and birth that in intercession? And
yeah,
and so kind of coming into the last 3 years, was we were seeing a lot of global unrest begin to arise, right?
Yeah.
And so again, I don't see these as just circumstantial events. These are there's another theologian, Abram Kuyper. Um, he said, "There's no neutral ground on earth. Every inch of this earth is being claimed and counterclaimed by Satan." Right.
Yeah.
And so we are in a war. Obviously we're in a war for our children, for our homes, our own lives, but there is a bigger chessboard above kind of our own personal concerns. Right. And I think when I got saved, I quote a lot of people, by the way. That's like but I heard a
I
quote
love
when I
it.
just got saved, and the preacher said, the most selfish thing you can do is ask God, what's your will for my life? Instead, you should be asking God, what is your will for my generation? How could I be a part of it?
Wow.
Because it says in the book of Acts, David fulfilled the will of God in his generation, right? God is a God who he loves us as individuals. He has a plan for us as individuals, but there is a plan corporately for nations and generations that he is working. And so that's kind of been our posture. And so when everything started happening, it caught our attention. One of the men who have profoundly influenced our lives, a man named Rees Howells, he started a Bible school in 1924 in Wales. Um, it grew to a couple hundred students, and then they went into World War II, and they prayed through World War II. They prayed for 7 years straight, not a day off, three prayer meetings a day. The last prayer meeting was 7 to 12 a.m. every night. Like these guys were just dogs. Like they were Welsh, like just in the words of the youth, they were animals. I mean, they were beasts,
Yeah.
right? But
I'm just
here's
gonna, so when we got back in 2023, when we met you guys, right?
yeah,
We got back from Nazareth Intensive and we had been in a season where we met regularly, at least weekly, with the sort of prophet father in our region named
yeah,
Jerry. We
yeah,
got back, we were like, "Hey Jerry, how are you?" And he just started, he's like, "Hey, how are you?" Like he just started talking about Reese House. Like he didn't, it was
Oh,
just
wow.
he
come on,
didn't know where we had been. He didn't know what we were doing, but he was like, I just didn't know anything about prayer until Reese Howells. And it was just made us laugh because
yeah,
we're like, of course,
yeah,
it was just the Lord like affirming.
God.
yeah,
Yeah, anyway, so
yeah,
it's always fun. I love
for
Freestyle.
sure. Yeah, and so Reese's life has always been a source of inspiration for us, and we
Yes.
had not when we started uh, doing all this prayer stuff, we were not in global crisis.
Hmm.
We were not even in national
Yeah,
crisis.
right.
And so in some sense, in the absence of a crisis, we went out to pick fights. And I say that in the most positive way possible. Like
Right.
this kind of abortion was status quo. Roe v. Wade was status quo. But we went out and tried to kill that giant, along with a
Right.
bunch of others, right? In that sense, I would say that those formative years of our lives trained us because in times of peace, typically you're not learning war, right? And
Right.
again, our war is not against flesh and blood.
Right.
But in time, even in our personal lives, when it's good, you're not really praying as much. It's when it gets desperate that you realize you have to pray.
Yeah.
But I think the difficulty is in the crisis, you may not be prepared for it, right? And so I would say when we look back on our history, we were fortunate. God's sovereign, plan was that He would have us in situations where we would have to win spiritual battles, so to speak, before the big battles came.
Right.
And so starting about 3 or 4 years ago, there was shiftings that were happening in on the global scene. And
Right.
uh, you know, what well, let me give you the very, very short version of maybe what Walker or others may and there's a whole teaching series we have on it. But the very, very short version, if you look at, for example, the life of Rees Howells, is that he actually sees great revivals as a missionary in Africa, 1918 to 1922.
Yeah.
10,000 people get saved. He comes back in 1922 to England to stir up missions and revival. What he doesn't realize is that he's actually mobilizing for the last revival and last missions movement, and the world has completely changed. 1922 to 1924, he's mobilizing revival and missions. During that same time period, three men come to power: Mussolini, Stalin, and Hitler. They all come to power in that same 2 year window. And then, as we all know, they define the next 20 years, right? And the world is in massive conflict from that point forward. We as we're reading this and just seeing kind of what's happening in the world, we're realizing we're in a very similar time.
Mm.
You know, COVID-19 changed the landscape of how nations interact with each other, people interact with each other. Then coming out of COVID-19, the next 4 years, Afghanistan falls.
Right.
Um, Russia invades Ukraine.
Yeah.
All these things begin to happen, and what we have known as the American world order or the Pax Americana um, is transitioning rapidly. And for those, who might be younger, they might not know the privilege of the world that they lived in. But the last 30 years
Yeah.
has been the most peaceful
Yeah.
and prosperous time in the
Mm-hmm.
history of mankind.
Right.
Not in the history of America, in the
Mm.
history of mankind. This has been the most peaceful and prosperous time, not
Yeah.
just for the 1%, but for humanity. Like there are
Yeah.
statistics. World Vision said that in 2020, before COVID, we were actually one or two steps away from eliminating world hunger and world poverty, which has
Mm.
never happened before in the history of nations. So
Yeah.
basically, we were in a very, very prosperous time, a very, very abundant time. Now, I would say that the rhetoric today doesn't focus on the blessings. I would say the rhetoric today focuses on the division and perceived inequity and all that kind of stuff, right? And that's really the kind of the Marxist language around today's discourse, right? But
Yeah.
but we have been, and that is in many ways coming to a close, right? American, and the way I put it is this: the way that affects us as Christians is the American missions movement grew up and matured and thrived under the umbrella of
Mhm.
American dominance. And we see this just as a historical pattern. I don't have time to get into all the cycles on this call, but the with the fall with the ending of the Cold War and America becoming the sole superpower, America not only exploded economically but became the hub for missionary activity. And since 1990, more people have been saved. Even in that 10-year period after 1990, more people were saved in that window than all of church history combined. Like we actually don't know like the American contribution to world missions. If you added up every missions movement in history and added them up, it still would not rival what came out of this American-led missions movement. That, missionaries were sent from all over the world, from Korea and all kinds of places. But it was led by American leaders. It happened under the American security umbrella. Since COVID-19, number of missionaries on the field has dropped by 80%, has not rebounded, shows no indication of rebounding. Um, and the percentage of global conversions has dropped by 40 to 60%. Now, when I first shared this 4 years ago, I would also share that Gen Z um, was the least religious generation ever in America. But in the last year, that has actually switched.
Mhm.
That Gen Z is the highest
Yeah.
church attending generation right
Mhm.
now in America.
Mhm.
More Gen
Wow.
Zers attend church percentage-wise than any other generational bracket in
Mhm.
America right now. So we are in the midst of a revival. Since Asbury, the
Yeah.
percentage of Bible sales has gone up by 84%.
Mhm.
Now the
Yeah,
question, because there's ratios, right?
yeah, yeah,
So is it when you say Gen Z is attending church,
yeah.
is that and that's a high number, is that in contrast to a lower percentage with the other generations, or is
Yes.
that okay? So, but then compared to other seasons where you look at generational, like when the older generation is attending church more,
Yeah.
how is it in that context?
So the way we measure that is growth in percentage.
Okay,
So basically every generation, so basically you see a massive rise with the boomers and the Jesus movement. But
right.
since the Jesus movement, every generation has gotten less religious,
Okay.
including the boomers,
Mhm.
Yeah,
right? And so there's more Gen Zers percentage-wise attending church than even the boomers, which is a wild thing
Yeah.
to think about.
that is
That's
wild.
crazy.
Yeah, and so it is a reversal that is not just unexpected, it is a historical abnormality. But I would say the biblical equivalent is Josiah, right? So Josiah is the generation that everyone writes off completely. And they're headed to exile, and then in that last sprint, God saves the whole nation,
Mhm.
right? And so I would say Gen Z is in this kind of historically abnormal season of revival that just we should not just write off and just
Yeah.
say, oh, whatever. No, this is what we were on college campus for 15, 20 years. This has never happened like this. You know what I'm saying? And so
Would
this
you
is
say that so most recently I heard that the college campuses are unreached people groups in America. Has the increase in Gen Z attending church, has that changed that? Like, would we no longer call most of our college campuses unreached people groups?
yeah, I don't know if I would use the classical definition of unreached people groups for college campuses, but they are much darker today than they've ever been.
Right.
Right. And so just in the last, since 2015, 2014, that season until now, the college campuses just went straight headlong into darkness and all kinds of ideologies. This stuff, it's pretty incredible to see what God's doing there. Um, and then with that kind of tied to, and we'll get to our Asia assignment, I think, in the third piece, but
Yeah.
basically with everything that's been happening worldwide in 2020, the Lord actually spoke to us that there's going to be you guys are going to have a global focus, which was funny because we went into COVID right away.
Mm.
Yeah.
And we went into a year and a half season where we couldn't travel, and we're a traveling ministry. Like our team is stuck at home, so all we could do was pray. And in that, God began to speak to us and meet us about our future assignments. Gave us a fresh burden for college campuses in America, gave us a burden for Israel that we're on, and then gave us a prophetic word about the Isaiah 19 highway, and then gave us this mission and assignment in Asia. All of this happened while we weren't traveling, and we were just like we were stuck. Like God had been speaking to us for 2 years. Come 2020, your attention will go global.
Mm.
We didn't go global. We got stuck, and we just got stuck in prayer meetings. And then God started confirming words.
Mhm.
And it was almost as soon as COVID lifted, we're in Israel. It was as soon as COVID lifted, where Audrey and I are in Kansas City with Matt and Kim Lockett, and we're at the Sen gathering. So we had a small part in the Sen gathering, but and it was the first kind of stadium gathering because Lou was not leading it. So we had a small prayer section, and then it was the first kind of stadium gathering where I was in like the box office area because they gave it to like the leaders. And I was like, that's so weird for me not to be on the field all day. But it was just one of those things. But we just talked with Matt and Kim for probably a few hours that day. And we're like, hey, Russia just invaded Ukraine. And we're
Yeah.
studying our prophetic history and our storyline. I'm like, and this is when the conversation was that maybe we should go to Taiwan just to pray. And we had a prophetic word given to us at the beginning of 2020, right when this COVID stuff was blowing up. One of our dear friends had a dream. He said, "I see you guys going to China," he said, "I was going to China on a private jet." And on the side of the jet, out on the outside, there was written the Nazarite Creed, and there was a logo that I did not recognize. I woke up in the morning because the Nazarite Creed is one of the things you do. I went to your website, and it was your logo, right? And like he didn't know, and so from that point on, we've been saying, Lord, one day you're going to send us to the Chinese speaking world. We don't know what that'll look like. And so when we were talking with Matt and Kim, Audrey and I, we started thinking about Taiwan. Audrey's half Taiwanese, but Taiwan is basically, it is going to be the flashpoint for everything that happens for the next 10 years. Taiwan will be the flashpoint. It is the economic hub of the technological revolution. 90% of all of our chips are designed and manufactured in Taiwan. That's anything from cell phones to cars. So remember during COVID, all of the cars got expensive. That was actually because uh, they couldn't import chips from Taiwan because of the COVID stuff. And then all the cars you couldn't make new cars because we didn't have the chips and then just spirals, right? The number one manufacturer of chips, it is whoever controls Taiwan controls the Pacific,
I have a
essentially.
question
Yes.
about the chips because
Yeah.
I've heard about massive developments in Arizona, I think,
Yes.
because
Mhm.
people recognized
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is a huge liability.
Right.
How
Yeah.
long do you think before that specific issue? Do you have any sense for that, or is that more of
It,
like a
it
market?
may take a decade, it may take 2 decades, and it may never happen. And the reason I say that is because it's not an Asian thing or an American thing. It's none of that stuff. It's that the manufacturing processes are so delicate and so high skilled that it would basically take all of the workers in Taiwan to just move here.
Okay.
That's essentially what it would take. It's actually a very difficult and sensitive manufacturing process. I can go into the geopolitics of this, but basically, starting in the 1990s, America made the era of moving all of its manufacturing overseas, right?
Yeah.
And so now it's catching up to us, right?
Yeah.
Because we're realizing we have no manufacturing here, and so that's why President Trump is kind of trying to get as many people back to America as possible. Um, But it's not gonna happen overnight, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so, you
I
know,
mean, I
yeah,
grew up in with the narrative watching that
yeah,
economically affect everyone around me, all of
right,
the manufacturing being
right,
outsourced. And
right.
then now we have this.
Our issues,
Yeah.
right? And so it happens in late stage of empires, right? This is classical life cycle of a civilization, and I'm an American. We're both Americans, and so have a huge heart for the future of this nation. But in the life cycle of an empire, and the life cycle of a civilization, America is in late decadence.
Mhm.
I don't Sociologists, IR theorists, geopolitical theorists, they don't understand how America is still alive.
Mhm. Yeah.
Can you
This is
throw
like,
out some
yeah,
names for people to,
yeah.
yeah, so tell me about like where do people go for this information?
Yeah,
Mhm.
Fred Markert is the easiest name I can throw because he can lead
Yeah.
you to a number of others. Lauren Cunningham called him the foremost missiologist on the planet. We have him speak at our Content Leadership Summit every year. He was formative in helping us understand this interplay
Mhm.
of nation states
Mhm.
and the gospel. And so he's the easiest that I can point to. But on a geopolitical, level, there's like I would say there's so many resources there.
Listen, it might be hidden in plain sight, but it's not hidden. Like it's, yeah.
As people say, history doesn't repeat itself
Yeah.
necessarily, but it rhymes.
Yeah.
And everything that America is going through, every civilization has gone through, none has ever lasted this long, which is the great mystery,
Yeah.
right? And I do think we should have collapsed sooner. I think God has given us extensions of mercy because of
Mhm.
the prayers of the saints, right?
Mhm.
I think we're in a window of mercy right now, and I don't have too much time to get into that, but I think we're in a 2-year window of mercy
Mhm.
right now for America and the nations. But just on a larger scale level, we exported all this. Now Taiwan is the hub. The Pentagon released papers saying that if Taiwan is successfully invaded, our only recourse is to bomb the entire island because the Chinese are still 5, 10 years behind us, and other nations even further back than that would immediately catapult them to 10, 20 years ahead of us. And so this kind of parity when it comes to the next important piece, which is military control, like
Yeah.
America's the first empire that has controlled all trade routes in its vicinity without colonization. Now, you can debate that. I don't know people debate America colonial, all that stuff. But we haven't colonized countries. What we've done is we've extended our military outwards in term. That's changing. Now our military is shrinking. Under President Obama, our military decreased by 20-30%. Um, and we have no reserves actually in a lot of different capacities because we shrank the military so much
Right.
um, over the last 20 years. And so we are where we're at. Taiwan's in the middle of it. The last thing that's really important is Taiwan is the only Chinese speaking country in the world where it's still free to preach the gospel. And the Chinese are, one of the largest people groups on the planet, and the destiny, I believe, of the Asian continent, the prophetic destiny of the Asian continent is to bring the gospel back to Jerusalem. I think the prophetic destiny of America was to bring the gospel to every nation,
Mm.
right? And so I think there is a shift that is happening here in a kingdom sense, where just as Great Britain gave America it's the gospel, I think America has brought the gospel to Asia, and Asia's destiny is to bring the gospel back to Jerusalem. And so we see this kind of in mission. If you study a kind of broad overview of missions history, which is a class I love teaching at SAFA, is we see how the gospel has moved across the earth, right? And yeah, and so we're in a pivotal place, and Taiwan is the pivotal nation for it. I'll just share one more thing about Taiwan before we go super into our current assignment. Is 400 years ago, the first missionaries came to Taiwan, and they prophesied. They said they observed first and foremost, there is no other nation in Asia where the gospel is so readily relieved and received. And then they prophesied from this nation, the gospel will go to all of Asia. I believe that is the prophetic
Mhm.
call of Taiwan. Through Taiwan, the gospel would go through all of Asia. And so we didn't know most of this stuff before we went. We just knew that Taiwan was going to be the next Ukraine.
Mhm.
That was what was on our radar. And I remember David Bradshaw, he's the leader of Awake in the Dawn. One time he asked me, he said, "Hey, so how do you guys pick where you're supposed to go for our prayer assignments?" And I don't know what came over me. I said, "Bro, I go where the dictators are." That was it was a mic drop moment. Like I thought to myself afterwards, I was like, man, that was cold. That was a cold one-liner, dude. Like I was patting myself on the back. I think what Rees Howells said is every time dictators arise, access to the gospel shuts down. Every
Right.
time there are totalitarian regimes, whether they're communist or fascist, access to the gospel shuts down. This is historically true, right?
Yes.
Iron Curtain in the Cold War, Nazi Germany, even before that, every time there are states that put up the wall, the gospel doesn't penetrate. And now we, like Rees Howells did, we are praying through those walls so the gospel can advance. And this is why we went. And over the last 3 years, we've gone 13 times to Taiwan. Our family has spent probably close to $80,000. Like we've had to fundraise $80 to $100,000 just to get our family back and forth. But God's done something in Taiwan and the surrounding nations that we could never, ever have predicted. And so,
I'm
yeah.
just blown away.